It's time for Health Futures with Cypress HomeCare Solutions, Bob Roth. This is Arizona's only show dedicated to providing you with expert advice on how to live a longer, healthier, and happier life. To learn more, call 602-264-8009. That's 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Bob Roth.
Good afternoon. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth, and it must be Friday. And indeed it is. It's August 24th. And we're coming at you live from the Scottsdale Air Park. And if you are just tuning into this show for the very first time, our show is called Health Futures, and it is about taking stock in you. And how do we do this? We bring extraordinary guests to the show, and today is no different. I want to just jump right into it because I've got a lot of stuff that I want to cover here with our guests. But before we jump in, we got to introduce our guest, and our guest today is Senator Nancy Barto. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's good to have you here. Can I call you Nancy?
Absolutely.
So, Nancy, you and I have gotten a chance to know one another for probably the better part of 10 years. And I've spent a lot of time down at the legislature trying to advocate for our older adults and trying to make Arizona a safer place for older adults to live. And I know that that's one of your passions, and certainly health is part of your passion too, because I believe in the 8 years that you served in the Senate, you were head of the Health and Human Services division of the Senate, correct?
I was, and it's always been great to see you down at the Capitol advocating and letting us know what's of concern to you. I've been blessed to be chair of the Health and Human Services committees most of the time I've served in the legislature. So it is a passion. It's an important, stable of issues. And so, there's nothing more that I'd rather talk about today than some of these issues that are so concerning to so many.
So concerning. And I feel like I have a special bond and relationship with you because together back in 2015, which wasn't that long ago, but it sometimes seems like it was a long time ago, we were able to put together a bill. And it is a bill that safeguards older adults. It has to do with disclosure, and disclosure relative to who the consumer is engaging. Are they engaging an employer-based agency, or are they engaging a independent contractor through a registry? And I have a lot to thank for you to get that through. You sponsored our bill for us, and I've learned so much over these 12 years. I didn't know what a sunrise hearing was, and we have to go through a sunrise usually December, which is right before the legislative session. I did a couple of those, and the last one we got through 9-1, and we had your vote, obviously, and we were able to get this heard out on the floor, and we've got both the House and the Senate to approve it, and we had Governor Doug Ducey signed it on April 1st, 2015, so thank you.
Well, my pleasure.
Thank you. And I'm not going to get into the meat of that bill, but I just wanted our listening audience to know they've heard me talk about it. Safeguarding our older adults, it's a very important priority for us. It's a very important priority for Senator Barto, so thank you. So, I want to, really pivot and really talk about you. Having you here on the show, the way the Arizona legislature works is you term out after you've done 8 years. You did, I believe, 5 years over in the House.
I did. I started over there, and hopefully in November, my constituents will return me there. I feel like with term limits and the way people go for this job and then decide not to go for the job, there's a lot of cycling and new people through the legislature. And this is such an important time in healthcare. I feel like my experience is really needed down there at this particular time, and my job's not done. So I'm looking forward to continuing to serve.
Well, I'm looking forward to having you continue to serve because you have done a lot, and we're going to talk about some of the accomplishments that you've achieved in the 13 years you've been down there. The last 8 where you've termed out is in the Senate, so now you're going back to the House. And just for a reminder, Senator Barto is running in District 15, and we want to make sure you know she's uncontested for the primary, but she is looking for votes in November for sure. And I want to just push this out here right now. If you want to learn a little bit more about Senator Nancy Barto, go to Nancy Barto, BARTO.com to learn more about her and where her positions are. You can also call her at 480-513-3750 or email her at nancybarto@cox.net. So, Nancy, I want to talk about where your priorities are, your focus, and really in this show it's about healthcare. So I want to bounce it back over to you, and I know you want a healthier Arizona.
I do. I guess I'd like to preface how I do my bills a little bit before we get into the meat of what some of them entail. How I come to sponsor issues and bills really comes from you, my constituents, from all over the state. They come and they contact me, or they contact their own legislator, and they tell us what's happening on the ground in their life. And most often, that's where the great ideas are for reform, and where the most impactful legislation is born, is from you, the voter, the constituent on the ground, and how government or an agency you're dealing with is really making things worse in some respect, and how maybe we can fix it.
You said it so eloquently. I mean, I want our listening audience to know this, that Senator Barto doesn't sit in her office and think about what bill am I going to create today. She listens to her constituents, and I happen to be one of those. When we put this bill together that I talked about before, Senate Bill 1401, you and I and 2 other people in my trade, we got together 3 or 4 times during the summer, and it wasn't even during legislative session, and we were like the only ones on your floor, and we were laying out what our plan was and asking you if you could assist us. And that is exactly what you're describing to our listening audience. If you want to get something accomplished, go seek out your senator, your representative, to talk to them about what your concerns are and what your needs are.
That's pretty typical, Bob. I mean, I can speak for myself, but I know my colleagues do the same thing. We're all busy during the interim when we're not in session, preparing for next session, because that's what it takes, really, to be successful in moving an issue forward. Finding a solution legislatively is the prep work for session. So, we're not just home at our computers all the time, although we do work from home sometimes, but we're down at the Capitol meeting with constituents about those issues during the interim and really learning what's happening and what's of interest and concern.
No, that's good to know. I mean, it's a 24/7 gig. It's not something that you can turn off at 5 o'clock. I would imagine you're getting emails all the time from constituents. Whether it be other legislators, whether it be lobbyists, you're constantly having to clear that. I get about 180 to 200 emails a day. I can only imagine how many you must get.
It can be a little overwhelming. I'm thankful for my assistant, Sue Sweeten. She's fantastic, and she loves to talk to constituents too, and she helps a lot. So I do have some help.
So when we come back in the second segment, I want to talk about our healthcare system and some of the concerns that you have as patients age here in Arizona, and that's really the sweet spot of our show. So I want to give a little tease to our listening audience. Nancy, it's hard to believe we're down our first segment. We're going out with a little Bruce Springsteen, so thank you, Wes, for taking us out. You're listening to Health Futures Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth, and I've got Senator Nancy Barto in the studio. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Now back to Health Futures taking stock in you. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Cypress HomeCare Solutions, Bob Roth.
Welcome back. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth. And if you're just tuning in, I've got Senator Nancy Barto in the studio. We're down one segment. And in the first segment, we really talked about how the legislature works and how you need to reach out to your senators and your representatives to make your issues or concerns known. And Senator Barto was really kind to say, look, we're approachable. You can reach us. We don't sit in a vacuum. We don't sit in our offices trying to figure out what might be the latest bill. We're pushing and advocating for our constituents. And really, I'm saying this on behalf of Senator Barto. She says the individual's best health is achieved when patients are informed and in control of their own health. And government can promote that goal, or it can get in the way. So true. So no better words have been said. So when we left off in the first segment, I teed up this segment because I want you to talk a little bit about our healthcare system. And it has been a concern to you as patients age in Arizona. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Well, there's so many directions to go on that. I think, probably the biggest issue that I hear most about is the lack of affordable healthcare options, and we can get into that a little bit later. But I kind of wanted to talk about some of the other issues that we actually dealt with this past session. And one of them was really interesting and I think very important to a lot of aging adults in Arizona. And that has to do with the concern about a lack of disclosure for individuals seeking to find the right fit for assisted living facilities for themselves or their loved one. And I mean, you might not be thinking about it, but there might be a conflict of interest involved if you aren't aware of a fee being paid to somebody who is showing you or referring a different one or more facilities to you, and how that might impact the type of facilities you'd be exposed to and the choices that you make. Maybe it's not the right fit. And so what we did was we actually, and this is one of those bills that took several years to get through because of the, it took a lot of education.
A lot of moving parts.
A lot of moving parts, as they say.
Yeah.
So what we did was we made sure that a referral agent has to disclose whether or not there's a conflict of interest and whether there's a fee being paid. And they have to do that on the up front.
Right.
Not in the small print when you're signing on the dotted line when you're moving in. So this was a very technical, complicated bill and also controversial. Not everybody wanted to come forward with that type of information.
I want to expand on that because I'm very close to that end of the business because we are in the older adult care business in the state of Arizona. And there are over 2,000 group homes and assisted living facilities, independent living communities on where people can live. And it's growing by the day. And if you live here in Arizona, if you look at just the 101 from Scottsdale all the way out to Surprise, there are 20 pretty large communities within a half-mile radius of that 101 that are all either under construction or that have opened in 2018. So this is growing by leaps and bounds. And, people, as I advocate here on the show, I would love to have people stay at home if they can, but not everybody can. And people, they can't, they need a place to stay. And Nancy, you were instrumental in helping this group be able to put this together so that the consumer knows exactly how much money is being paid, exchanged between the referral agent and that facility or group home. Because before it was not known. I mean, there was no disclosure. You couldn't tell if it was $50 or $5,000. And there was a lot of stuff and still a lot of stuff going on. And we still have a lot of work to do. Like anything else, this is just the beginning. And I know a little bit about the bill, and I know the one group that opposed it and the one that stood neutral. They're big entities, and they have deep, deep pockets. And trust me, we've talked about it in the first segment. This is an election year. And when you have big corporations like this that are affected by this, they seek out their candidates to run for office so that they can change legislation. So this is a good thing, and it's a good start. And the thing I really like about this bill is you and I talked prior to the show that it has some enforcement pieces to it. And that was one of the pieces that we still need to do on ours, and ours is still a work in progress. And this is a monumental bill, and as I said to my colleagues in this space, you need to spend more time down the legislature educating the ledge about the need to make sure that this disclosure bill stays, and if it needs to be revised and revamped, and why it needs to be revamped and revised.
Exactly. Sometimes bills get repealed when they're signed into law because there's a real effort by opponents to not see it really have its desired effect.
Right.
A lot of people can be hurt by this situation, and a lot of people are going through finding an assisted living place for the first time, don't know the questions to ask. All of those things. Trust but verify.
I love that. Trust but verify, and just think about this. And Nancy, I know you've gone through this with your own family members, and many of our listening audience have gone through it as well. You're taking somebody that may have lived in a 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 square foot house, and you're putting them in a room about the size of our studio here. And that is a difficult thing to do. It really is. There's a lot of emotions that come along with that, a lot of stress, and it's just a big challenge overall. So disclosure is really, really important.
Yeah. So that was a big, big lift.
Yes.
Big accomplishment, lot of constituent involvement in that. And, it's easier now these days than even when I first started in the legislature for people to get involved. Because with the computer, you can really make your voice heard for or against legislation. Online, by phone, and of course, just emails.
And if I can say this, because I've learned about the legislation, is that you need to go down to the Capitol and sign up. Because if you sign up at one of the terminals there, you can vote on any bill remotely. You don't have to be down there. You can also be heard. You can have your comments put down, and they can be read. So it's all good stuff, but you have to be active.
Yes, you do.
And I want to leave with this, because it's hard to believe we're almost down our second segment. So, there was a murder in Fountain Hills, and Fox News came to speak to me about it. It was the 92-year-old woman who shot her 72-year-old son, and there was talk about her being moved into assisted living. And they wanted me to comment on this, Nancy, and I said, look, I really can't comment on the situation because it's very fluid and the investigation's going on. But the one thing I did comment on is the need for families to plan. And this can't just be a spur of the moment. These are the conversations that don't happen once. They're a conversation that you have over time, talking to your loved one, saying when you become incapacitated and you are not able to live home alone, where do you want to live? So my message, my overall writing message to our listening audience is have those conversations. Make sure your loved one expresses what their desires are. And we talk about advance directives all the time. We talk about medical power of attorney, and we talk about do not resuscitate. But the plans on where you want to go are really important, because there may be a time you won't be able to express those.
So important. And, I can't help but think that maybe mental illness might have been a part of that picture. And maybe we can get into that a little bit later.
Sure.
But you're so right. We have to think about the future, and we need to think about that for ourselves as well.
We're at halftime here at Health Futures. We're going to talk a little bit about mental illness when we get back. Bob Roth here hosting. I got Senator Barto here in the studio. We'll be right back.
Now back to Health Futures, taking stock in you. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Cypress Home Care Solutions, Bob Roth.
Welcome back. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. We're on our third segment, and I've got Senator Nancy Barto in the studio, and we had two incredible segments. If you missed them, please go up to our website at cypresshomecare.com. Click on the media button up on the top. The third button down is our radio show. You'll catch those first two segments, and you'll catch over 200 that we have been bringing to you for the last 5 years. And Wes Franco, our esteemed engineer, it must be Bruce Springsteen Friday. So thank you for bringing the boss. And the end of that song is I got a wife and kid in Baltimore, Jack, and I'm from Baltimore. But I live here in Arizona, and I love this great state of Arizona, and I love the work that Senator Nancy Barto is doing and a lot of your colleagues down at the Ledge have done. And, you know, I think that everybody's very familiar with the way the legislative session ended this past year. It ended on this movement, #RedForEd. And, you know, I'm not here to talk about the pros and cons to that. All I will tell you is it really did suck the air out of the oxygen in the Capitol, and everything was focused in on that. But I will say this, because I'm in the healthcare vertical, it's just not teachers. We have so many others that are out there that need to get more income. We need to figure out how to take care of them, and caregivers come to mind. Detention officers come to mind. There's so many other workforces that are out there. I just want to see us advocate, at least for me, for caregivers. You know, Senator Barto, we talked about it before, you know, workforce, the work that caregivers do is hard work.
It is. You know, the upside is, I think, you know, with the economy returning, a prospering economy, I think, you know, there is some light at the end of the tunnel, because we're seeing that there's going to be more and more prosperity going around for everybody when people can hire more, when they can make more and spend more. And hopefully we can see some of those wages increase as the job market tightens, frankly. You know, employment is so low. Employers need to spend money to keep good people. And so that's a part of how our system works. You know, it's you've got this industry with a great need, and you've got a lot of competition, and you've got too few workers, frankly. So they do need to be paid more, and to keep good people, they're going to have to pony that up. Now, unfortunately, you know, it's just a really difficult job to do for a lot of us. And there's a lot of moving parts, as they say, to it as well, in terms of, you know, the minimum wage pressures that I think, you know, voters passed this thinking, oh, good, this is an easy solution for the problem. But unfortunately, it's really backfired in a ton of ways. And I think it's a warning to voters when they vote on these ballot initiatives. Hey, be careful what you ask for, because government cannot just come up with the money just because the voters say. These things have to be legislatively debated. And, you know, you vote in representatives so that we can look at the whole picture and, according to our founders, kind of put in place those policies that are deliberative and not passed by the voters in general because of a soundbite, whether it sounds good or not. I'm sure your voters have heard this, but it bears repeating that when we pass something at the ballot, it can literally not be changed.
Exactly.
Even when there are blatant errors in the policy, we have to live with it.
You know, the comment about soundbite is so apropos with this. You know, this proposition, this initiative that you talked about was up against the heels with the legalization of marijuana. And I'm not sure a lot of people really paid attention to this minimum wage proposition. And I'm for one, and I know you too, Nancy, aren't against people making more. We want people to make more, and we want people to prosper. But it really boils down to demand and supply. And you know, nobody really asked the legislature, no one asked the the residents of this great state. They put this proposition out there, and as an employer, small employer, which this country was built on, like Cypress HomeCare Solutions, the minimum wage thing didn't really bother us because we were already paying caregivers. Minimum wage was $10.50, and at that time the minimum wage was $8.05. So we were over $2.50 over minimum wage for the people that were just starting out, and we were paying up to $14, $15 an hour for caregivers. The piece that really caught us off guard and caught Arizona small businesses off guard is this thing called EPST, and that's Earned Paid Sick Time Off. And there's specific rules on how you manage that. And
small print, you've got to read the
you
small
have
print.
To. Yeah. I mean, to give you an idea, I had a caregiver who called off a shift the week of Christmas and called off for 3 days, 3 shifts. She came back to work a month later, and she said, oh, by the way, I was sick. I need to be paid for those days. I have to pay for those days. And
how do businesses survive under that kind of pressure? They can't. And that kind of leads into, some of the pressures that we're seeing in just the affordability of healthcare in general as a result of the so-called Affordable Care Act, which drove so many employers completely away from providing health insurance for their employees because they could not even stay in business while trying to abide by those mandates. Fortunately, we're seeing some real light at the end of the tunnel in terms of being able to have some more options for, especially in the individual market. And as we said, the economy's coming back, and employers are becoming, they are in a competitive market for good employees. So they're back in the business of offering health insurance as they grow and prosper. But in the state, we're going to have some real opportunities to make sure that our laws align with what the federal government is doing in terms of short-term health plans, make sure that those are available. We've also, done some other things to make sure that people can have options. It's not just, alternative health care is huge and works for a lot of people. The answer is choice. People are individuals. They need options.
They do.
I think this is a good direction for our country.
Well, and especially in the times that you're talking about. I mean, the economy is prospering. The stock market's doing well. Here in the town of Arizona, or the state of Arizona, construction is near an all-time high. New homes are being built. Commercial buildings are being built. Industry is moving here. Exciting things are happening in Arizona. And I talked to a friend of mine just yesterday from California, and he told me in his neighborhood he knows 3 people that left the state. And where did they go? They came here to Arizona.
Exactly. We have a forward-looking governor. We have a forward-looking legislature that really wants to put the patient in control and allow options for them, and not be top-down government control, because it just doesn't work for everybody.
The Medicare for all, not going to work.
No.
One-payer system is not going to work. We need to give people options.
Right, and we have to focus limited government resources where they do the most good and where they are really critical. We talked a little bit about mental illness in the last segment at the very end, and that's an issue that really needs focused attention, and it attends to every age group, including the elderly. What we're seeing right now, after the many years of our institutions going away, frankly, we're seeing people with chronic, serious mental illness in the institutions called jail, prison.
And we're seeing it in our communities.
Yes.
And, we need to, it's that old adage, you see something, say something, and we need to speak up when we see somebody that isn't well. They're not a bad person. They just need to get help. And we have resources. That's the greatest thing about Arizona. In the nearly 25 years I've lived here, it's amazing all the stuff that is here now. And I'm talking medically, whether it be cancer research, whether it be hospitals, whether it be centers of excellence like the Banner Alzheimer's Institute. It's all here in our backyard.
A lot to be proud of.
We got Bruce Springsteen taking us out again. Wes, thank you. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. I'm Bob Roth, your host. I've got Senator Barto in the studio. Please stick around. We'll be right back.
Now back to Health Futures, taking stock in you. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call 602-264-8009. Now, here's your host, Cypress HomeCare Solutions, Bob Roth.
Welcome back. You're listening to Health Futures, Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth, and I've got Senator Nancy Barto here in the studio. We're on segment number 4. We've got so much to cover. I've got to have you back, Nancy, but I want to pick up on what we left off on the second segment and the third segment. We've talked about mental health illness, and I want to pick up on that and maybe discuss one more thing before we say goodbye today.
Thank you. You know, it's a very serious issue, mental illness, and often it sort of gets pushed to the back burner, especially with the opioid addiction problem, which has really taken a lot of the media attention, and for good reason, understandably. Yep. But, you know, what we're seeing across our country, we mentioned deinstitutionalization before, and how, you know, we're actually institutionalizing many with serious mental illness in institutions currently,
right,
in our jails, in our prisons, in our emergency departments. And then we see them homeless and on the streets.
So sad.
It is. It's one of those issues that is at my forefront because I keep hearing from the families. And the families are the ones that are most at risk. You know, you talked about this 92-year-old woman who killed her 79-year-old son. They're the ones that are caring for their mentally ill family members.
Right.
And yet often they're left out of their treatment plan because of HIPAA. They're not involved. And oftentimes, well, you know, physicians, caregivers, social workers have all been trained to not talk to anybody in terms of a person's behavioral health issues because of HIPAA. One of the things we did a couple of years ago, we passed a law that reinterprets Arizona's HIPAA law. And it's more closely aligned now to the federal intent of HIPAA, which actually says that a physician or social worker or other healthcare professional can include a family member when it's in the best interest of the patient. Now, how can it not be in the best interest of the patient?
Exactly.
When they have no capacity and when the person is their major caregiver, knows that person best, knows what meds they're on, what meds work well, what meds don't, and is actually going to be the one that they're going to discharge that individual back to, maybe
right.
in 24 hours. You know, public safety is a big part of the discussion. We don't like to talk about, you know, the mentally ill perhaps being a danger to the public, but untreated, they are. That's why they get arrested. That's why they're in jail. So, okay, what's the solution? One of them is the HIPAA law that we fixed. We still have to get more people implementing it and talking to family members. But we actually need to be looking at the elephant in the room, and that is more contained treatment, more 24-hour supervised treatment facilities for those with chronic serious mental illness. Those are the ones, not your average person, but the very, very small percentage of those that end up there. We can do a lot by refocusing existing resources there and being humane with this population. And really what we're doing is protecting society, protecting families, and serving Arizona, being more not only compassionate but efficient with our resources.
You know, I look at some of the things that you've accomplished, and they kind of dovetail with what you're saying. And veteran suicide awareness, Senate Bill 1431.
Huge.
It was huge, and it was something that you worked on. And the independent oversight committees who were dedicated volunteers helped the legislature oversee services and grievances for mentally ill and disabled. These are you're out there advocating and fighting for these families and these individuals, and I love that about you, Nancy.
That's our job. Our job is basically oversight over the agencies. We're not here to cheerlead for them. We're here to make sure they're doing their job and serving you. And that independent oversight committee bill is very important because we need to make sure that these vulnerable populations, like people with disabilities, like children in DCS, like the mentally ill, are really being watched. That those services are doing their job.
I'm going to throw you maybe for a curve. You're talking about mental health illness, and one of the biggest challenges we have is pharmaceuticals, prescriptions, and I would like to get your thoughts on the costs. And I know as we wind down, do you have any plans to address that? Because some of these families, Nancy, choose food versus the medication. And, some of those families that are dealing with mental health illness, they need some of those medications.
Absolutely.
And pharmaceutical, the costs are really enormous, and it's really hindering their ability to get the right meds at the right time.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't agree more that is a huge issue for patients, even without mental illness. I think there are a lot of, again, quote unquote, moving parts
Yeah, they are.
to these issues. And some of them will actually need to be dealt with at the federal level. In the state, what I see as a potential problem and hopefully a solution is looking a little closer at the PBMs, the pharmacy benefit managers, and their part in actually raising costs rather than putting these drugs in a more affordable format for pharmacies. They are the kind of a third party that contract with providers with the state and people like CVS. And so, in the private market, we need to take a closer look at some of these things because some of the way that their business model pans out can really raise some questions on whether or not they're forcing independent pharmacies out of the market, whether they're actually kind of gaming the system. So again, oversight is sort of on my radar on this issue.
Well, it's hard to believe we're almost at the end here, and I want to bring you back because we wanted to talk about dental and some of the other initiatives that you're working on, and we have some time before November, and I want our listening audience to know who Nancy Barto is. Make sure you go to nancybarto.com. You can email her at nancybarto@cox.net, or you can call her at 480-513-3750. She's running for a representative of our state, District 15. It's been such a pleasure to have you here today, and I feel like we just scratched the surface. We have so much more to cover, so when we're done here, maybe we can compare calendars and get you back out here.
Awesome. I look forward to it. Thank you so much, Bob.
You're welcome. You've been listening to Health Futures Taking Stock in You. I'm your host, Bob Roth, and I've had the pleasure of having Senator Nancy Barto here in the studio. Make it a great day. Have a great weekend. We'll be back next week.
There's no place like home. You've been listening to Bob Roth's Health Futures. If you have questions about your own or your loved one's future health care, call Cypress HomeCare Solutions at 602-264-8009. That's 602-264-8009. Or visit cypresshomecare.com. Be sure to join Health Futures with Bob Roth every Friday at noon, right here on Money Radio 1510 and 105.3 FM.